Going once, going twice. Sold.
Now, we're going to be talking, training tip of the week here. We're going to be talking about county records a little bit, doing a county records review, because it plays such an important role in all of the research that we do. Pretty much all of the information that we obtain about properties is derived or comes from county records. And so we want to take a few minutes here to talk about the county records that we spend the majority of our time with. Now, for us, there are basically three main departments that we focus on when it comes to county records, or pretty much there's three areas we go to for county records that covers pretty much all the research that we do and everything related to tax sales. And that is, the treasurer's office, their information, the assessor's office, and then the recorder or the clerk's office. Sometimes it's called the clerk of the court. And sometimes it can be, it can vary a little bit. And instead of a treasurer, there might be a tax collector instead. That varies a little bit with some states, but for the most part, you're always going to have those three offices there in every single county. Now, the reason we're looking at the treasurer's records, though, and why that's always going to be so important to us is because they're generally the ones that oversee the tax sale. So in most cases, unless state law hands over the responsibility to somebody specifically, it's usually the treasurer that is responsible for conducting the sales, and also they're the ones that have the records of property tax payments, which a lot of times can help us understand a little bit about how the property ended up in the sale and what its history has been like.
Yeah, absolutely. As tax sale investors, we really are county record researchers. That's where we're going to be doing 80-90% of our research on these properties is through the county records. So it's real important that we understand what are the different county records, how do they work, and what are they going to be used for. Like Shade said, the treasurer records, the tax collector records, they'll usually or many times be the one that's handling the sale. So we'll go to their web page to be able to see that information. That may be where we get the tax sale list, the rules of the tax sale, but it's also where they're going to list any of the delinquent taxes. Now, with the tax deed auction, the opening bid amount is the delinquent taxes. So it is not as important with tax deeds as it is with tax lien certificates, really being the fact that those tax lien certificates could have additional years of tax liens on them. So there could be past year liens that if we go and foreclose on that property, we're going to be in charge of paying off. So for the treasurer records, we're going to go there to get the tax sale list. But for tax lien investors, this is going to be an important area, just as important as the assessment or the assessor, because we need to see, is there any additional tax liens on the property? I mean, looking at this particular property, we can see that there was different tax lien certificates that had been issued in the past. That's obviously going to tell us something. In fact, if we look down there, we can see back in 2015, there was actually a tax deed application that was applied on this property, meaning that they went to go foreclosed, but the property owner paid it off before the tax sale took place. So even that tells us something about the property as well.
Yeah, in fact, that's something we always try to check out or look at is the payment history on the property taxes, even if it is a deed. A lot of times can tell us a little bit about how the property ended up here and what the chances are, or what's most likely to have happened. In other words, let's say that we look at a property record like this, and we can see that the property has had delinquent taxes owed on it most of the time, and it's gone to the sale nearly a couple of different times here, but it redeems last minute. Well, what's most likely to happen with that property this time? It's most likely to redeem again, because that's what has been the pattern up to this point. And it's obvious that there's an owner that's involved there. They're just late with their property taxes, and so they're probably not going to let the property go to foreclosure. So we might keep an eye on that property and see if it makes it to the sale, but we're probably not going to invest tons of time into it, just knowing that it's most likely going to redeem, and it could redeem the day of the sale, as well. That kind of thing always happens, but knowing what that history is going to give you a better idea of exactly what it is that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, and if it was a tax lien certificate, that means that it'll probably have a highly chance of redeeming, which means that if you just wanted to hold a tax lien for a while, that at least gives us an idea that there's an increased chance it's going to get paid off and that we won't go to foreclosure. So if you were just looking at interest rates, that may be a tax lien that you could go after, knowing that, hey, chances are this is going to get paid. Now, this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time is the assessor records. This is really when we teach our 3 stages of due diligence. This is kind of what we're focusing on in stage 1 due diligence is reviewing these county assessor records. records. Many times, if it's an online auction, they may be directly linked to that online auction list. If we're using a PDF list or an Excel list, we'll look up the partial search tool. All counties are going to have these, or at least most counties. And we can use the search engines that are available, Google or whatever else, to be able to find this information fairly quickly. They're usually going to be listed at the very top as long as we're using the right keywords.
Yeah, the reason we go here to the assessor record usually first is because this is where all the property information and ownership information is going to be contained that we need. And so, again, everything related to the valuation on the property, its location, what it is, how it's used for, sales history, taxes, ownership specifics are all going to be included in the assessment record. And so, again, it's the most important place. It's the hub for all of the property records, really, for the county, is really kind of the assessor's office and the records that they provide. So, one of the first things that we do when we look at assessment records here is we look at the owner of the property and we see if the property is owner occupied. So we look to see if the mailing address and the physical address are the same thing, are the same address. And if they are, then we know the property is owner occupied. If we see different addresses there, then we know that it's not owner occupied. And essentially it will have less protections in some ways, but also properties that are not owner occupied always have a higher chance of going to foreclosure, just because, again, the party losing the property wouldn't be put out by not paying it. In other words, so there, the effect isn't quite as direct, and so therefore, I think you have a little bit higher chance here. With if it's owner occupied, you have a higher chance that that they're going to pay it off last second or figure out some way, to do that.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, if we're looking up at the top right-hand corner, it's going to tell us information about this property. We can see that it's a condominium. It's one unit. It was built in 1972. It has 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, about 1,000 square feet. So when we're going here for stage 1 due diligence, we're really looking at this information. We're looking at the address. We're looking at the sales information, or excuse me, the improvement information. What is this property valued at? All of that kind of information. Now, when we talk about stage 2 due diligence, which we review the records, that's where the sales information is going to be important. So the information down there on the bottom, the ownership information. But right here, what we're trying to determine, is this going to be a good property or not? Now, most of these counties are also going to provide a GIS map as well, which is another thing within the assessor records that we're going to be researching. But just based on this is kind of where we're making a decision. Is this a property I want to learn more about? Does it look interesting? Or in this stage, we can say, hey, this is just a junk property. Maybe it's a property that's been burnt down, or maybe it's a strip of land or something like this. This is where we're kind of making that first determination. Is this a property we want to research more? Or is it a property we're going to take off our list? And we should be able to do that just based off the information on the assessor record.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that we have to do in some cases is in certain states, they will sell, or at least they'll have the records for something like a mobile home. It's not always included. Sometimes the mobile home is not being taxed as property, and sometimes it is. So for example, let's see here. In Illinois, Illinois is a good example of a state where they have mobile homes there, and some of the mobile homes are included and are assessed and basically are taxed as real property, and some of them aren't. And so when you look at a piece of property, if it has something like a mobile home on it, then that's one of the steps that we go through. Is we will go into the records and look for basically the improvement information there to see if they have value for the mobile home added there, and if it's being taxed according to that mobile home value. Because if that's the case, then the property and the mobile home are one, at least for the county record and for the purposes of buying the property. If we were to look at that though, and there was no improvement value there for the mobile home, we would know that the mobile home was not being taxed as property. And is basically owned by somebody else, and most likely, whoever the owner is, they either own it or they know somebody that that's brought it onto the property. In any case, it's not something that would come with the property, and so you either have to get it hauled off or get something figured out there with the property if it's not included. That's the kind of thing that we can tell by looking into the assessment records every time. So if if we look at something, if it has good improvement value that's there, or if we see a home, a lot of times we can judge the condition of the property by the improvement value that's assigned to it. Now that varies with every county, and of course we want to look at other properties in comparison to that, and also kind of see how counties do it. But that's something that we use on a regular basis. Now, when
In fact, I was just going to mention one thing. You bring up a good point. If you look underneath the appraisal information there on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the improvement value, the land value, and the total market value. Now, condominiums aren't going to have land value. It just means improvement value. So that's the reason we see just improvement value listed here. Now, if we were looking at a regular single family home, there would be an improvement value, a land value, and then the total market value. If we were just looking at a piece of land, that would only have the land value and not the improvement value. So that's something we're looking at as well. Is, let's say that we see a vacant lot and there's an improvement value on there. Well, chances are that this has probably been a property that's been demoed pretty recently, and the county hasn't updated their information. So even though there's an improvement value, if we're looking at a Google Street View and we can see that there's no home there, that's automatically going to be some sort of red flag or something we need to look more into.
Yeah. In fact, this property is kind of interesting. We can see that, this property is located on 306 Wellington, Wellington something here. And we can see that the owner, the mailing address for the owners is actually on 4 Cambridge Avenue. So it's not owner occupied. We can also see that the owners, so it's listed as being owned here by a Barbara Reed, and it looks like it's actually in a trust now, is what it looks like, and that's what we normally see if somebody has passed away.
Yeah, we're definitely getting into retirement age. I mean, you can see over there on the owners, there's, they actually have 3 different names underneath that, just her own name, one type of trust, and then a second trust. So this is usually going to happen when people get into retirement age. Now, chances are that they may have passed away, and that's probably the reason it's going up for the tax sale. But automatically, that's at least an indication that they're putting it into some type of living trust or some type of trust where this is kind of retirement type income or retirement type investments.
Yeah. Now, we can use the assessment records, though, always to locate other records. And one of the first things we usually look for once we have the assessment records open is for GIS mapping. And that's because once we can see what the value of the property is and what it is, all the information that assessment record just showed us, what we want to do is lay eyes on the property. We want to see what the property, we want to see where the property is located at. We want to make sure it's accessible. We want to know where the property lines are. And so the GIS systems save us so much time with this. And part of the reason why we love GIS maps is because they're so much better than what we used before, which were plat maps. Plat maps are really just, that's where they basically just print up a page, or it's like a PDF of a map, and you have to figure out which lot is yours from, between all the different lots here based on the legal description of the property. That's a pain, and it takes a lot of time. These GIS maps make it so much easier and allow us to do additional research. And so a lot of times, we're going to look for links to the direct maps. So you can see on this side, they've got a preview of the property overhead. There's a link to the tax map right there. And they also have this thing called an oblique image viewer, which most of the time that we look at these, they just tend to be an additional set of images from overhead. I think in both cases, I think the images are taken by planes. But the oblique image viewer sometimes tends to be a different set of images there than what the tax map images or the main GIS images usually are.
Yeah, sometimes it's a bird's eye view. It's more of just kind of a little bit slighted image where you're looking at it from an angle versus just right on top of it. But not everywhere is going to have that. Really what we're looking for is the GIS map. That's going to go ahead and pull up the entire map where we can see where this property is located. We can see what the surrounding properties have as well. In fact, this is a real big game changer. When me and Shade first got started in the early 2000s, we had to look at plat maps. And plat maps, were essentially a black and white map, and it was very, very difficult to try to find this information. But now with just a matter of a couple of clicks, we can go ahead and pull up that GIS map. We can see what the property looks like. And in fact, when we go look at some of these properties here a little bit, as we go look at an upcoming auction, we'll look at and use some of these features that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, we usually will use the GIS maps to figure out too locations so we can pull it up on a Google map and hopefully get some kind of street side image, which a lot of times are now available. And so that teaches us more about the property. But between those two, those are all surface level things. So when we're looking at the assessment record on the property, it's telling us, you know, the property's value, kind of what it is, ownership, and the mapping shows us location. But what those things won't tell us are any of the risks that exist with tax sales related to liens. Liens are actually a huge risk for tax sale investors because they're quite common with a lot of these types of properties. And so essentially when we need, one of the things we have to do with every property before we buy is we need to be able to search it for liens. And the way that we're going to search it through for liens is through the county recorder's office or through their records. They're going to, this is going to be the same department that records things like property deeds. So anytime something changes with property deeds, this is the office basically that handles that. They're also going to be responsible for recording any kind of lien. So it doesn't matter if it's a federal lien, you know, so like an IRS lien, which we don't see very often, or even like a state lien or something. Any lien against a property would have to go through the recorder's office. And so they're going to basically make note of that. And when we're looking for that information, when a lien is issued against an individual, it's always going to be issued against the property owner. You know, the owner and their name is what we're going to be looking at. And then beyond that, when we look at the lien itself, we can find property details or information about the property connecting the property to that particular lien. So that we find it through the owner's name, but then we need to read into the lien in order to see if it is actually applicable to our property or not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, you know, really what we're looking for is we're looking for the county clerk or the recorder's office. Whoever's in charge of collecting the mortgages, the judgments, the liens, the death certificates, that's going to be the whoever's in charge of keeping all these records, that's where we're going to be going and looking. And like Shade said, what we're looking for is any type of government issued liens. The great thing about a judicial tax foreclosure is it eliminates mortgages, it eliminates judgments. It eliminates non-government liens, something like a mechanics lien, for example. But what it's not going to eliminate is these other type of government issued liens. And so because of that, we need to make sure that we research these properties before we buy them, because some of these government liens could still attach. Now, there's three different types. Shay kind of mentioned there's a federal lien, there's a state lien, but 9 out of 10 times, I would estimate that they're going to be a local municipality lien, whether that be the city, the county, the town. And these are going to be two different types of liens. One is going to be what we call a nuisance lien, or what's called a nuisance lien. This could be an example of somebody going out there and needing to cut the grass, remove garbage, remove vehicles, anything like that. Even a demolition would be some type of nuisance lien. The other type is going to be a utility lien. For example, let's say that the city provides sewer or power or something like that, and somebody moved out of a property and they didn't pay their power bill. There may be, you know, a power lien against that property as well, utility lien. So that's really what we're looking for as we're reviewing these different county records.
Yeah, and finding them is actually fairly simple, I guess. And how much work it's going to be varies with the name and how many results come up with each name, because that's really what we're trying to manage here, are the number of results that come up and then trying to find the liens through those results. And so all we really have to do is plug a name in there, and as long as we've got the name in correctly, it should be the same name, you know, of the property owner. Then it should pull up any of the records that come up with that name, attached with that name. And if we do happen to pull up a ton of records, so let's say sometimes we only pull up 5 records or 10 records, we can go through that and know if there are any liens within those really quickly. But if it pulls up 500 records, then what we're going to do is we're going to combine, do a name search, but also do a specific document type search, and we're going to be looking for liens specifically. And so if we're doing that, then what will happen is that number will drop from 500 results down to 8 results, and those are all liens that we're looking at. And so then we can go through each one of the liens that are there, and we can see, we're looking for again, information tying that lien to our property. We want to make sure that it has a legal description on there, or that it is somehow stating that the lien is using that property. Because otherwise, there can be a lien against the property owner, but if it's not if it's not against the property itself, though, it's not going to matter. It's not going to, count as you buy the property.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to go ahead and look up that information. We're going to go ahead and review it and see which liens may be against the property. And then at that point, we can go ahead and do what we call stage 3 due diligence, which is the final researching, where we're going to do a drive-by or have photos taken of any type of structured property, where we're going to go ahead and check the market value by looking at comparable properties that have sold within that area. And then third, what we're going to do is we're going to set our high bid amount. So, in going through these steps, really the county, as I said in the kind of the beginning, the county records is where we're going to do 80% of our research. So if you want to be a tax sale investor, you need to learn how to research these county records. The better you're able to do it, the more accurate you're going to be able to determine what the property is actually valued at, and the information that you need to get from these records to be able to determine if it's going to be a good investment or not. If we're looking at a building lot and let's say it starts at $500, but it's got a $12,000 demolition lien against it, and it's only worth $10,000, then we're going to avoid that property. You don't know how many times we've seen mistakes made, luckily not by our students, but as we attend auctions, as we take our students to auctions, as we bid on properties, where we know that this property has major risks, major red flags. In fact, it's what we would call a toxic investment. And just to see people bidding on those properties, knowing that they hadn't done the due diligence to determine it was a toxic property, they just assumed everything was okay.
Well, and there's no reason why we can't find the information. When 20 years ago, trying to find this information, a lot of times you had to do it on site. I mean, granted, it's public information, so the county is required to provide it, but that doesn't mean they have to provide it online. And so it used to just require a lot of on-site research. So you had to be there at the county records building in order to get the information. But we rarely ever run into that anymore. I mean, I can't remember the last time that we tried to locate records in a county and couldn't find them. So we don't actually really have title searches done on properties, like professional title searches, no, because that's going to cost a lot of money. And we can find everything that's important for us to find against the property on our own and doing an investor title search, where we basically go in and we look for liens and we find the liens against the property. Now, we have to do that on every single property, before we buy, in order to know if there are liens that exist against the property or not. But we don't necessarily have like a title search or we don't pay somebody else to do that, because we can always get this information on our own. It's always there now. There's always an online record search now that is accessible. In a few cases, I guess they've made us pay for it, which if we are participating in a sale or something like that, then we may pay for access to their system there for a short time so that we can easily pull any of the records that we want from there. But we're not having any kind of a title search performed, just because we can do it ourselves faster and certainly much cheaper, obviously. And so every time it's basically a regular prerequisite in order to check for any kind of liens against the property before we buy, and that's essentially how we do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and even when you do have to pay, it's a minimal fee, $10, $15, $5. Usually, 90% of the time, most of the time it's going to be under $20 to be able to do that. So it's worth it if we're going to be bidding on properties.